You join me here outside the Majestic Hotel in Tramore on the occasion of Waterford Chamber's President's Lunch, and I'm joined by Paul O'Neill, who's the guest speaker here today. And Paul O'Neill, of course, is the editor of the Irish Times and himself a Waterford man. It's lovely to get the opportunity to have a chat with you, Paul. What will you be saying to the members of the Chamber here today?
I guess the main thrust of what I hope to do is maybe take them through the changes that have happened in journalism in the, 35 years. I'm almost afraid to say that since I left the News and Star. It's kind of hard to imagine that when I walked out of the door, we were in the industrial estate in those days. I'd never used anything other than a manual typewriter. And even anything I wrote in those days was sent off to Cork, where it was packaged into a newspaper. And 35 years later, anything that we publish in the Irish Times essentially can be read pretty much instantaneously by anybody in the world. And that's just an extraordinary transformation. I mean, really, the whole world has turned on its head in the meantime. And there are a lot of good things associated with that. And obviously, in the week that's in it, an awful lot of bad things that are also there. And I'm not sure actually that the world has managed to get its head around how to control these things, because everything needs to have rules attached. Absolutely. And when you think of the digital transformation and what the Irish Times has achieved, because it is a climate where there's dwindling newspaper sales, and the demise of the newspaper has been widely talked about. But what you've managed to do is actually grow digitally and in print, which is quite remarkable. We introduced a hybrid payment model in 2015, but actually the Irish Times was the first Irish newspaper to get involved in the internet back in 1995. So we've had an awful lot of incarnations over the years before we managed to, I wouldn't quite say we've cracked it at this stage, but certainly we are starting to make money out of it. And I mean, newspapers need revenue, and media companies need revenue in order to continue doing what they're doing. And good journalism costs money to produce, and we are in the business of good journalism. And if we are to thrive and if we are to survive, we need the internet to make money for us. I mean, it's been hugely positive in terms of bringing us to a much greater audience. I mean, just to give you an example, in June last year, we published what I believe to be the most read article in the history of the Irish Times. It was read by 1.3 million people. There were 1.3 million people. But in actual fact, 10% of those were in Ireland, and the rest were around the world. Now, it was a very special article. It was a column by Fintan O'Toole, and essentially it related to Donald Trump. But courtesy of Facebook, it actually went around the world, and really to every country in the world. It was quite phenomenal. So that's the kind of reach that you can get nowadays. But the reality is, where do you find a revenue that goes with that? And that's what we're succeeding to do, or that's what we've succeeded so far. Last year, I'm really, really happy to say, and I think that's what you're referring to, that the decline in print newspapers, and there's no point in pretending otherwise, people are now reading online and they're reading on their mobile phones. But what we lost in newspaper sales, we more than compensated for in subscription revenue to irishtimes.com. And I'm sure some of your readers or some of your listeners will, when they think of the Irish Times, they'll think of a newspaper that's produced 6 days a week. But in actual fact, we're much more than that now. I mean, we operate effectively 24/7 via irishtimes.com. We have a website, we have an app. We engage with our readers through emails, push notifications, podcasts, videos. I mean, it really is a massive transformation on the company I joined 30 years ago, which essentially was producing a newspaper. So you're really more of a content producer these days, aren't you? And I mean, just I suppose to put it into some context as well, because it was the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism who came out with their latest digital news report, and they said that the Irish Times had achieved a 26% rise in digital sales in 2018, the only newspaper to grow across both print and digital. And your success in carving out online subscribership is really, I suppose, the key to making money. But for a long time, I'm sure it didn't. No, I mean, and that was the problem. And for a long time, you looked into the future and you wondered, well, where was the revenue going to come from? And as I say, I come from I'm the editor of the Irish Times. I come very much from the journalistic side of things. But in reality, for me and my colleagues in the editorial team to do our job, there needs to be a source of revenue. And for so many years, there didn't appear to be the prospect of revenue from the digital world. But I think what we've discovered actually is that people are prepared to pay for good journalism. And the fundamental thing here is good, high-quality journalism. Obviously, that's quite a subjective thing, and everybody will have their own view as to what that is. But in reality, people are subscribing and paying, in a world in which so much content is free. People are prepared to pay for the Irish Times, and we have about 90,000 subscribers at the moment because they value what we do. And I mean, I guess that's the integral thing. And that's not happening in a vacuum. Because of the problems with Facebook, because of the advent of things we'd never heard of before, like fake news and disinformation and misinformation, I think people are starting to question what is it I'm reading, where is it coming from, who's deciding that this is what I'm seeing on Facebook when I turn it on, and that's where people are starting to turn, not just to the Irish Times, but to media organisations that are deemed to be independent and most of all are deemed to be trustworthy.
So in some ways, fake news has been a boon for papers like yourselves, like the New York Times, like the Guardian. Yeah,
I think the New York Times is a well-known example at this stage. In the aftermath of Donald Trump's election, the subscriptions to the New York Times absolutely soared, and it was almost like people sort of giving their response to Donald Trump. In the early stages of Trump's presidency, I mean, anything we wrote about him, I mean, it was almost like rocket fuel for readership. It's funny enough that wears off, and it's the funny thing about Trump that actually, when you base your modus operandi on being outrageous, the outrage has to continue to grow, and it's almost like he's changed the rules of engagement, and really people, I don't think, engage with it in quite the same way anymore. It would make you a little bit scary about the US presidential election, because in order to get the same result, he's going to have to be more outrageous. So I think we look forward to that with interest. And I suppose one point I'd make there is that, when you look at the Irish Times and why would people subscribe to us, we have Suzanne Lynch on the ground in Washington, who's already preparing for the presidential race, which essentially got up and running this week. You look at major international stories that are impacting on Ireland, like Brexit, and from when it will come to a peak in October, but we will have our own team. We have our own team, that our London editor Dennis Staunton, Paddy Smith in Brussels, Lara Marlowe in Paris, Derek Scally in Berlin. It's that sort of Irish view on the ground, telling the story in a way that Irish people want to hear it. And that's what people, it seems, are willing to pay for.
And it must also be encouraging, because the facts that emerged as well from the analysis of digital news is the amount of young people who are subscribing. So overall 12% of respondents in Ireland paid for news online, which was actually 1% higher than the EU average. But younger people, 19% of 25 to 34-year-olds were willing to do so. So that's a good sign into the future, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think young people lead the way in terms of digital technology. And in a sense, well, I think maybe an older generation would have been saying to themselves, sure, we don't have to pay for this stuff is free. Young people have essentially changed the commerce of the internet by essentially paying for things. I mean, obviously, everything from flights to Netflix, in particular, like where there is, in Netflix in particular, there's a pattern of a monthly subscription, and young people in particular would do that without thinking. And so why should that not carry through? If people were once prepared to pay for a newspaper because they believed in the values of that newspaper, why would they not pay for the same journalism delivered to them electronically? I mean, it's not just about free information. You have to be able to believe what you're reading, or otherwise what's the value of it?
Absolutely. Now, just to move direction ever so slightly, of course, Irish Times as a group bought Thomas Crosbie Holdings, and that includes the Irish Examiner in Cork, and also ourselves in WLR and the Waterford News and Star. Where do you think kind of local and regional media fit into this kind of new digital paradigm?
Well, I mean, obviously that purchase was a huge step for the Irish Times, and I mean, I suppose the reality is that the Irish Examiner is the big segment of that. It puts us in a position where we have a leading media group in the two main cities with no great overlap between them, and editorially and commercially, that's a good move. I mean, in truth, it's also a consolidation move, and there's a lot of work to be done in terms of reducing the costs so that we can ensure the survival of both organisations. I think at a regional level, I mean, it won't surprise you. I mean, I spent 5 years in the News and Star, and my dad was the editor of the News and Star for 16 years. I was there from 82 to 87. I'm a huge believer in the value of local media. In the 5 years there, it was a phenomenal learning experience. You get to know the community in which you live when you're involved in journalism. It's really all about people, and it's absolutely essential that there continues to be strong local media, because the local media has the capacity to challenge and to interrogate, and also to champion local causes. And I think from the Irish Times perspective, if we're going to be successful in our involvement with the regional media, we know that it can't stand still. And hopefully the experience that we've gained over the last God knows how many years dealing with the digital change and the information revolution will be an asset, and at the very least will avoid the new colleagues who are involved with us make the same sort of mistakes we did at various stages along the way. As I said, we've had an awful lot of incarnations in the digital world. It's taken a long time to see a way in which you can make it work.
Because it's very difficult for local media. The Irish Times, you were lucky in that there was the resources there to kind of see you through the transition and as you figured it out and how to get it right. But, resources for local media is very difficult. You're relying on local advertisers, very affected by the general economy. So I'm sure management of News and Star very much welcome your input and what you have to offer. And talking, this was generally about Waterford then and the media, and I suppose maybe from your perspective, do you feel we're well represented in the national media?
On the broader issue of Waterford, in preparation for the trip down today, I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce a few weeks ago, and that was sort of one of the questions that came up, and I really felt at that time that I do think there was a sense in the political establishment in Dublin that something needed to be done for Waterford, and I'm conscious of the fact that there's a long-standing issue with the WIT, there's the issue with the Cat Lab, there's the North Quays, and also there's the airport. And one of the things that would have one of the issues that I raised that time in talking to the Chamber was that Waterford needs to be clearer really what was top of its list, and I don't know if the airport was top of the list. I'd just be slightly afraid that this is it for now. If you look at where the government is trying to rein in spending, there's a real Fine Gael has been quite rattled by the local and European elections, and its reputation as the sort of guardian of the public finances is at least in question. And with the threat of Brexit on the horizon, I'm not sure there will be too much more money. But in reality, it was just to get back to where we started. It was a political decision, and at a basic level, the people of Waterford, I think, will have a general election in the not too distant future, and they'll have their opportunity to make their own views known on how they think Waterford has been represented. And
when they're trying to make those difficult decisions, no better paper than the Irish Times to help and guide them on that path.
Yeah, well, the truth is actually that we commit a huge amount of resources to the covering of politics. We probably have the biggest political team, and we're, with the exception of RT, we're the last media organisation that actually, at a basic level, covers what's happening in Parliament, because we see it as part of our duty. And it really just comes back to the brass tacks of what the function of the media is. It has to be covering all of these things, the machinations of politics, the operations of the justice system, how public administration operates. And if that means that the media is asking questions about, is it the right thing to put 5 million into a runway in Waterford, that's part of the job. The reality is there are answers to that question as well, and the people who are there to answer them need to do a good job in actually explaining the case.
Great. Paul O'Neill, editor of the Irish Times, really lovely to chat to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Jonathan Earl, Chamber President, here today at, I suppose your lunch, the President's lunch. Great to have somebody like Paul O'Neill here to talk to Chamber.
Yes, indeed, yeah. Paul, being a native of Waterford, it's great to get him back down, and in his position, it's so important, and there are so many national influencers that are born and bred in Waterford. So it's great to have someone like him down speaking to us, but it's also important for us to communicate to him as well, and the other kind of national people like the Dan Mulhalls or the John Tracys, these people that were born and bred in Waterford and now have a national presence, that we keep them informed of what's going on in Waterford, so they know, because we can't assume they know. So there's a communication going both ways. But yes, it's super to have him down to speak at this event in the beautiful Tramore on a day like this.
And lovely to have the event here in Tramore.
Well, indeed. Tramore Chamber of Tourism and Commerce amalgamated with Waterford Chamber about 9 months ago, last September. And the relationship, mainly, to be honest, down to Linda Lawton, has been really super. And every year, or every week I should say, there are new members, and I was delighted that we could have the President's Lunch here in the Majestic, and the weather certainly came as well. But every event we've have had out here has been really good, yeah.
Jonathan Earl talking to me there. Well, that's all we have time for this week. I hope you enjoyed the show. You can listen back to a podcast of it on the WLR website. But for now, from me, have a great week and thanks